First comment gets a shout out in the next video.
I just heard shots ring out and then got shot at. I know there's no way he could have made it out of the car.
I told you can't trust these niggas. Now Puffy done killed Tupac, man.
We know something's wrong with you, but it's okay, because M said it's okay and Dre said it's okay.
Yeah, I had nothing to do with this.
If I wouldn't have never met him, I wouldn't have never been involved in this bullshit. You know what I'm saying?
I ain't never made a call to Diddy. I got Diddy's number. Just hit him up. Yo, Diddy, what up? Never happened.
And the winner is Eminem, the Eminem Show.
In the late 1990s, as hip-hop money exploded and power shifted behind closed doors, there was a strange silence where fear usually lived. Executives moved carefully. Artists picked sides. Careers rose and vanished overnight. And in the middle of that storm, one name stood out for what he did not do. Eminem did not play along. While others bowed to influence, he stayed distant from one of the most powerful empires in music. Not loudly. Not publicly. Just firmly. And that quiet refusal would echo for decades. Before the fame, Eminem was an outsider scraping by in Detroit. No industry protection. No rich backers. Just raw anger, hunger, and words sharp enough to cut through anyone. When he broke through, it was not through traditional power routes. He came up under Dr. Dre, a figure respected but also feared, someone who had already survived the brutal politics of the industry. That mentorship mattered. It gave Eminem something most newcomers did not have. Independence. At the same time, Sean "Diddy" Combs was building something massive. His reach extended far beyond music. Labels, fashion, media, parties where decisions were made long before contracts were signed. Being close to that empire meant access. Being outside it could mean isolation. Many artists chose proximity over principle, sometimes without fully understanding the cost. Eminem watched all of this from a distance. Early on, there were signs he wanted no part of it. He kept his circle small. He mocked power openly in his lyrics. He refused to soften his edges for industry comfort. While others whispered concerns in private, Eminem put tension on record. Lines that sounded like jokes to casual listeners carried weight to those who understood the subtext. He was not accusing. He was warning. And he was doing it without asking permission. As his fame grew, so did the pressure. Collaborations were suggested. Relationships were encouraged. Silence was often rewarded in this business. Eminem chose noise instead. Not chaos, but honesty. His music kept circling the same themes. Control. Fear. The price of success. The people behind the curtain. And every time Diddy's name floated through the culture, Eminem remained distant, almost defiant in his absence. To some, it looked like arrogance. To others, survival instinct. Because by then, stories were already circulating. About loyalty tests. About careers that stalled after crossing invisible lines. None of it proven. Much of it whispered. But the pattern was hard to ignore. Eminem seemed to see the shape of the machine and decided early he would not step inside it. And that choice would not stay quiet. Years later, when lyrics sharpened and old tensions resurfaced, people began to ask whether those early refusals were just artistic independence, or something much darker that Eminem sensed long before the public did. If you are already feeling where this is going, like the video, share it with someone who follows music industry stories, subscribe to Crime Decoder, and drop a comment. By the early 2000s, Eminem was no longer just a rapper. He was a global force. His albums sold faster than the industry could count them, and his words carried weight far beyond music. But with that level of power came attention from places he never trusted. The higher he climbed, the closer the industry closed in around him. And the lines he refused to cross became clearer. Behind the scenes, hip-hop was not just art. It was politics. Alliances mattered. Silence mattered even more. Diddy's influence stretched quietly but firmly, through executives, media connections, and cultural gatekeepers. You did not have to sign a deal to feel the pressure. Invitations, collaborations, award show relationships, and strategic friendships shaped careers without leaving a paper trail. Eminem watched this system operate in real time. Instead of adapting, he doubled down on isolation. His music became more confrontational, more exposed, and more dangerous for people who relied on control. He did not name names directly, but his bars carried intent. References to powerful figures. Jabs that sounded casual but landed heavy. To insiders, these were not random punches. They were signals. At the same time, Eminem's loyalty to Dr. Dre stayed firm. Dre had already survived industry betrayal, violence, and legal chaos. He understood what unchecked power could do. That mentorship reinforced Eminem's instincts. Stay independent. Keep ownership. Do not owe favors to people who expect silence in return. It was a mindset that quietly separated Eminem from many of his peers. As years passed, tension simmered. Eminem's name appeared in conversations about artists who did not play the game. He did not attend certain events. He did not align publicly with certain figures. And most importantly, he did not retract his lyrics when they made powerful people uncomfortable. That alone was risky. Then came the era of diss tracks and lyrical warfare. While many saw these moments as pure entertainment, others heard something deeper. Eminem's attacks were not random. They were precise. Anger mixed with frustration, aimed at systems, not just individuals. His words suggested resentment toward manipulation, fear-based loyalty, and exploitation masked as opportunity. Publicly, nothing exploded. No lawsuits. No press conferences. Just distance. But distance in this industry can be louder than accusation. Fans began connecting dots. Why did Eminem never cross paths with certain power players? Why did his lyrics keep circling the same warnings? Why did he seem almost allergic to certain empires? The more the culture shifted, the more his old lines aged differently. What once sounded like exaggeration started to feel like restraint. As stories about industry abuse, coercion, and silence surfaced years later, people revisited Eminem's past words with new ears. And that is when the question changed. Maybe Eminem did not refuse an empire out of ego. Maybe he refused because he saw the cost early, understood the risk, and chose isolation over compromise. And if that is true, then his silence was never silence at all. If this shift in perspective is hitting you, like the video, share it, subscribe to Crime Decoder, and leave a comment. By the late 2010s, the distance Eminem had kept for decades began to feel less like avoidance and more like a line he had drawn in concrete. The industry had changed. Social media pulled back curtains that once stayed closed. Old rumors resurfaced. Quiet stories found louder platforms. And suddenly, Eminem's past lyrics didn't sound symbolic anymore. They sounded measured. When Eminem released tracks like Killshot and later verses that referenced power players with surgical precision, many listeners focused on the surface-level beef. Rap rivalries. Competitive ego. But buried beneath the punchlines was something colder. A pattern of language about manipulation, false authority, and people who thrived on control rather than respect. He was not exposing facts. He was exposing dynamics. For years, Eminem had used his music as a pressure valve. He rarely gave interviews explaining meaning. He let the words sit unclarified. That choice mattered. In an industry where statements are walked back and lyrics are softened, Eminem did neither. He stood by his work, even when it made people uncomfortable. Especially then. Around the same time, more artists began speaking carefully about their own experiences in the industry. Not accusations. Not full stories. Just hints. Discomfort. Regret. Warnings disguised as jokes. A familiar pattern emerged. Those who spoke too clearly paid a price. Those who stayed vague survived. Eminem remained in a rare position. Too big to silence. Too independent to pressure. That independence did not come without cost. His isolation deepened. He stayed away from industry celebrations. He withdrew further from public spaces where alliances were expected. Critics framed him as bitter or stuck in the past. But fans noticed something else. Consistency. His message never changed, even as the culture caught up. Then came renewed interest in Diddy's past relationships, business practices, and influence. Again, much of it remained unproven or unresolved. Allegations without verdicts. Stories without court conclusions. But the volume increased. And with it, people began revisiting Eminem's long refusal to engage. Not as drama, but as foresight. What stood out was not what Eminem said, but what he never did. He never praised the empire. He never sought proximity. He never softened his tone once power was established. In a world where survival often depends on strategic silence, Eminem chose strategic distance. And that choice now looked deliberate. As listeners re-examined his catalog, they found restraint where they once heard rage. Warnings where they once heard exaggeration. Eminem had never claimed knowledge of crimes. He never presented evidence. He simply refused to glorify power he did not trust. And sometimes, refusal is the loudest form of dissent. By now, the question was no longer whether Eminem was afraid of Diddy's empire. The question was whether he saw something early that others ignored, and chose to protect himself before the cost became visible. If this chapter made you rethink Eminem's silence, like the video, share it, subscribe to Crime Decoder, and leave your thoughts below. As public scrutiny intensified, the industry's old habits became harder to defend. Stories that once lived in private conversations began leaking into mainstream discussion. Journalists asked different questions. Fans noticed patterns they once ignored. And the idea that power in hip-hop was built purely on talent no longer held up. In that shift, Eminem's long-standing distance took on a new and unsettling meaning. What made his position unique was not accusation, but alignment. Eminem never aligned himself with systems that demanded loyalty without transparency. He kept ownership of his work tight. He resisted image polishing. He rejected the kind of networking that blurred lines between business and obligation. These choices insulated him. While other artists found themselves entangled in legal disputes, public fallouts, or reputational damage, Eminem remained largely untouched. That did not mean he was unaware. On the contrary, his music suggested constant awareness. Themes of exploitation, manipulation, and moral decay appeared again and again. Not framed as scandal, but as inevitability. As if he believed unchecked power always corrodes, no matter who holds it. This worldview placed him in quiet opposition to anyone building empires through control rather than trust. Meanwhile, Diddy's public image continued to project success, influence, and dominance. Yet behind that image, scrutiny grew. Past business dealings were re-examined. Relationships were questioned. Again, no conclusions were finalized. No courtroom outcomes reshaped the narrative. But the cultural mood shifted. People became less willing to dismiss discomfort as jealousy or rivalry. Eminem never capitalized on this moment. He did not step forward to explain himself. He did not frame his lyrics as prophecy. He stayed silent, letting the work speak on its own. That restraint mattered. In true crime, silence is often suspicious. In this case, it felt intentional. Protective. Ethical. What stood out most was how rarely Eminem sought validation. He did not ask to be believed. He did not invite speculation. He simply maintained the same stance he always had. Distance. Independence. Refusal. And in a culture where narratives are constantly rewritten for survival, consistency became evidence of conviction. Fans began asking harder questions. If Eminem was simply arrogant, why did his behavior never shift when power dynamics changed? If his lyrics were empty threats, why did he never retreat when those lines crossed sensitive territory? And if his refusal was personal, why did it mirror concerns later echoed by others, years apart, across different corners of the industry? This chapter of the story is not about guilt or innocence. It is about pattern recognition. About how some people sense danger long before it becomes visible. Eminem's story here is not one of exposure, but of avoidance. And sometimes, avoidance is survive. By the time the culture began openly questioning long-standing power structures in hip-hop, Eminem's role in this story was already complete. There was no reveal left for him to make. No statement waiting to drop. His position had been clear for decades, written line by line, choice by choice. What once looked like hostility now looked like boundaries. What once sounded extreme now sounded careful. The final truth is quieter than people expect. Eminem never tried to expose Diddy. He never claimed criminal knowledge. He never positioned himself as a whistleblower. Instead, he did something far less dramatic but far more telling. He opted out. In an industry built on proximity to power, he chose separation. In a culture that rewards compliance, he chose control over his own work, his voice, and his silence. That decision protected him. While others navigated lawsuits, public reversals, and reputational collapse, Eminem remained largely untouched by scandal tied to industry politics. His controversies stayed personal, internal, and artistic. Addiction. Mental health. Fame. All visible. Nothing hidden behind influence or favors. That transparency, intentional or not, kept him grounded in a way few artists at his level managed to achieve. For Diddy, the story remains unresolved. Public perception continues to shift. Allegations circulate, investigations evolve, and the legal landscape remains fluid. It is critical to be clear. Allegations are not convictions. Questions are not verdicts. But culture has a long memory, and it often revisits the past with new understanding. When it does, patterns matter. Looking back, Eminem's refusal was never loud enough to trend, but it was steady enough to last. He did not chase validation. He did not rewrite his history to fit new narratives. He simply stayed consistent. And consistency, over decades, is rare in environments built on leverage and fear. This story is not about proving wrongdoing. It is about recognizing instinct. About understanding how some people sense risk before it has a name. Eminem's legacy here is not bravery in confrontation, but discipline in distance. He survived an industry that consumes its own by refusing to let power dictate his path. And that leaves us with the question that still lingers. Was Eminem just fiercely independent, or did he recognize something early that others ignored until it was too late? If this story made you think differently, like the video, share it with someone who loves deep dives into power and silence, subscribe to Crime Decoder, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think Eminem really saw?